Since the beginning of the 20th century, Iran has seen countless crackdowns on freedom of expression. From the revolution of 1979 on, the Islamic Republic of Iran has waged an ongoing assault on the press. By examining the increasing restrictions on the press in contemporary Iran, we gain a glimpse into the state of political and cultural life in the country. The first press law in Iran was enacted in February 1908. The primary press-related crimes defined by the law were insulting the monarchy, forgery of news, and insulting Islamic holy figures. Many newspapers and magazines found their way into publication in the following years, and some well into the reign of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Some of the most famous newspapers in this era were Kayhan, Etellaat, and Sobh Omid. However, the press still faced significant restrictions. Later, despite a brief opening in the beginning of the revolution of 1978 to 79, as the new system took shape and a number of Iranians opposed to Khomeini were executed, the state began to formulate a new approach to the press. In the years that followed the Iran-Iraq War, the rise of Ali Khamenei to the leadership and the presidency of Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani contributed to the strangulation of the Iranian press. During Rafsanjani's second term, and at the beginning of the reformist President Khatami's term, journalists came under increasing pressure. Many were targeted during the chain murders, a spate of extrajudicial killings in the 1990s, which were later connected to Saeed Emami, a former deputy minister at the Ministry of Intelligence, and remain one of the darkest points in the history of the Islamic Republic. Many believe that the chain murders were aimed at discouraging the efforts of President Khatami and his reformist supporters to ease restrictions on the exercise of cultural and political rights, including the right to free speech. Despite these dangers, the Khatami era was a new age for press freedom in Iran, remembered by many as the spring of the press. During that time, a large number of publications were able to secure publishing permits. Around the same time, the newspaper Salam published the text of a letter from Saeed Emami to Iran's Minister of Intelligence on its first page. In his letter, Emami suggests amendments to the press law aimed at silencing the press. In response to its publication of the letter, Salam was banned from publishing for 5 years by the Special Court for the Clergy on the charge of printing confidential material.
مجموعه رفتارهایی که صورت گرفته بود و اعتراض دانشجویان در حقیقت به فضای سانسور و سرکوب مطبوعات بود و از طرفی دیگه کشور به دو جناح مشخص تقسیم شد، جناحی که علاقه بیشتر به سرکوب و بستن فضای مطبوعات داشت و جناحی که علاقه به باز شدن فضای مطبوعات داشت.
On July 15th, the newspaper Sobh Emroz published the news of the ban against Salam. On the same day, 125 members of parliament voted for the amendment of the press law, significantly weakening the freedom of the press in Iran. A few months after the July 1999 student demonstrations and subsequent crackdown, Saeed Hajarian, deputy chairman of Tehran City Council and editor-in-chief of Sobh Emroz, was the subject of an assassination attempt. Hajarian was left permanently paralyzed as a result of the attack. The closing of Salam and the assassination attempt on Hajarian marked the beginning of the onslaught of the forces of the Supreme Leader and other fundamentalists against the popular movement for reforms and the closing of the relatively open atmosphere of the first years of Khatami's presidency. In a speech in April 2000, the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei declared that reformists and the press that supported them were connected to the enemy, saying some of the publications today are footholds of the enemy. They're doing the same things that the radio and television stations of BBC and the Americans and the Zionist regime are doing.
اما اول دفعه روزنامه بهمن ماه اگر اشتباه نکنم منتشر شد، هنوز تیکاف به اصطلاح نکرد، از جاش بلند نشد و آقای خامنه‌ای در سخنرانی عید نوروزش در مشهد بدون اسم جامعه به شدت به روزنامه حمله کرد و اونو توطئه خارجی خوند و از این حرفا.
After this speech, dozens of newspapers were banned and a number of journalists were arrested. The judiciary, and specifically Saeed Mortazavi, a hardline judge of the Revolutionary Court of Tehran, who would later play a central role in prisoner abuse and corruption scandals, acted on Khamenei's claim and utilized a pre-revolutionary security law, which gives judges the right to imprison hooligans without a conviction, to round up journalists. Ultimately, hundreds were left jobless.
و ایرادهایی که به وسیله مجلس پنجم به قانون مطبوعات وارد شده برطرف کنه. اما بعد از اینکه پیش‌نویس قانون تدوین شد و وارد دستور کار مجلس قرار گرفت، بلافاصله با یک بدعت جدید در حوزه حقوق مطبوعات مواجه شدیم به نام حکم حکومتی.
در قسمت بعدی مجلس ششم که قانون مطبوعات رو میاره و با واکنش مقامات در واقع روبرو میشه و از دستور در واقع خارج میشه، مجلس سرمایه‌گذاری میکنه روی مسئله اینترنت و رسانه‌های مبتنی بر تکنولوژی ارتباطات که موفقیت‌های خیلی خوبی رو هم به دست میاره برای دراز مدت. بعد از اون دوره آقای احمدی نژاد باز هم ما با محدودیت‌های بسیار بسیار وسیع مواجه میشیم و رسانه‌ها دوره خیلی بدی رو تجربه میکنن متاسفانه و بسیاری از روزنامه‌نگاران ناچار به ترک وطن میشن یا حتی از ترک از شغلشون.
When running for office, Iran's next president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, promised that he would support the freedom of the press during his presidency. But the reality was quite different. With the election of 2009, this pressure on the press intensified. Reformist newspapers like Etemad Milli, which was connected to Mehdi Karoubi, and Kalemeh, connected to Mir Hossein Mousavi, were shut down. During the protests, many journalists were arrested and tried as protesters for documenting the protests. Ultimately, hundreds of journalists were jailed or forced into exile. During Ahmadinejad's presidency, 61 written warnings, 9 revocations of publishing licenses, and 15 outright bans were issued by the Deputy Minister of Islamic Guidance, Mohammad Ali Khamenei. By the end of Ahmadinejad's presidency, and with the rise of a government that called itself moderate, there were expectations that the restrictions on the press would be lifted. Among the most controversial newspaper closures during Rouhani's term is the closure of Mardom Emrouz, after it published a picture of George Clooney and the headline "I am Charlie" on its front page. The current 9th Majlis is held by a conservative majority, which is trying to develop a plan to issue bans against certain journalists and writers from writing or publishing in Iran.
چون آقای خامنه‌ای در واقع یک دیکتاتور ساده نیست، ایشون یک مستبد دینی در رأس نظام استبداد دینی قرار داره که ضمناً تمامیتگرام هست، توتالیتر هم هست و قائل به اینکه جامعه رو باید مهندسی کرد، قائل به اینکه باید از مردم تعیین تکلیف کنه چی بخونن، چی بیاندیشن، چی بپوشن، چجوری رفتار کنن و ابهام نداره ایشون میگه، یعنی چند دفعه تا حالا مثلا راجع پوشیدن هم بعدش نمیاد که مثل کره شمالی لباس واحد تنه مردم بکنه.
With every newspaper banned and every journalist jailed or attacked by government supporters, a new precedent is established and a new red line is drawn. The experience of the press in recent decades highlights that these restrictions are typically arbitrary. This means that any citizen attempting to subject government institutions to any form of scrutiny is liable to face professional or even criminal sanction. By spring 2015, the Iran Human Rights Documentation Center estimated that there were over 50 journalists and bloggers in Iranian prisons. In this environment, government censorship is only one cause of the narrowing of political and cultural discourse in Iran, but each of these restrictions is also a crack in the democratic facade of the Islamic Republic.